Today we're looking at the War of 1812 and the defense of Fort McHenry. Hello, welcome to the Daily Bellringer. Please don't forget to subscribe and take a look at the questions down in the description. Also, don't forget to check out dailybellringer.com where you'll find more resources that go with many of the Bellringer videos. Late August of 1814, the British had landed 4,500 troops near Washington, D.C., and the Americans had put up a feeble defense at the Battle of Bladensburg. On the night of August 24, 1814, the British marched into Washington and set the city to fire, burning the Capitol building, the White House, and several other government buildings. The next day, on August 25th, a freak storm struck the city, putting out many of the fires and forcing the British out of Washington. Now, the British turned their attention towards another city just 35 miles north of Washington, the city of Baltimore. Baltimore had an excellent harbor, but there was one big difference between Baltimore and Washington. Baltimore was much better defended. At the opening into Baltimore Harbor was Fort McHenry. Built from 1798 to 1803, the fort was named after James McHenry, who was a signer of the Constitution and served as President John Adams' Secretary of War. The British planned a two-pronged attack against Baltimore and its defenses. First, they would land troops to the east of Baltimore and march towards the city, and then simultaneously, they would attack Fort McHenry with their large fleet of ships to gain entry into the harbor. On the morning of September 12, 1814, 9,000 British troops landed just to the east of Baltimore at North Point, Maryland, and began their march towards the city. Very quickly upon beginning the march, the British start meeting resistance from American troops, and the Battle of North Point began. The British were under the command of General Robert Ross. Ross had been a veteran of the Napoleonic Wars and was the commander of the British when they burned Washington just a few weeks before. The British troops really trusted General Ross as he had led them to several victories. As the Battle of North Point wore on, the British were not making much headway, and so Ross rode up to the front to rally his troops. In the process of doing this, Ross got shot by an American sharpshooter, and Ross died a few hours later. The death of Ross really takes the momentum away from the British, as the British troops had really depended on Ross as being their leader, and now command of the British passes to Commander Arthur Brooke. But the British continue to fight and actually force the Americans to retreat. But instead of retreating in pandemonium as they had done at the Battle of Bladensburg a few weeks earlier, the Americans retreat in an orderly fashion and take up a defensive position just outside of Baltimore. But now, as all of this is occurring, we also have the battle at Fort McHenry that is beginning to ramp up. Fort McHenry was under the command of a young 32-year-old major named George Armistead, with about 1,000 American troops inside the fort. Armistead and the citizens of Baltimore had been preparing for this attack for weeks, basically since Washington had been burned. The people of Baltimore were so determined to keep the British out that they actually sunk their own ships in the entrance to the harbor to create a man-made reef that the British ships would not be able to get past. As part of the preparations at the fort, Armistead had called for a new flag to be made to fly over the fort. The order went to a woman in Baltimore named Mary Pickersgill, who made an absolutely massive flag. It measured 30 feet by 42 feet. Today, that flag is on display in the Smithsonian Museum of History in Washington. But early in the morning on September 13th, over a dozen British warships opened fire on the fort. For the next 27 hours, the British continued to fire on the fort, launching over 1,500 shells, cannonballs, and even newly developed rockets were exploding above and in the fort. The soldiers inside the fort did fire back, but many of the ships were just out of range of American guns. As the sun went down on September 13th, a storm moved in, and now over the fort were flashes of lightning and flashes of cannonball. The only way the people of Baltimore knew if the fort was still being held was if they could still see that flag flying over the fort. The next morning, the flag was still there, and the British realized they were not going to be able to get past the fort, so they ceased fire, put up their sails, and sailed back into the Chesapeake. At around the same time, British ground forces under Arthur Brooke decided to abandon the attack and march back to their ships. Now, famously, an attorney named Francis Scott Key, who was being held on a British ship trying to get the release of a friend, He was there on the ship watching the attack as it took place, and he watches the entire thing from a few miles away and keeps looking for the flag to see if the flag is still there. After witnessing the attack, he writes a poem called Defense of Fort McHenry. The poem is passed out in Baltimore and then put to the tune of To Acreon in Heaven, which was a British drinking song, and becomes known as the Star-Spangled Banner, which officially became the national anthem in 1931. So with that, hopefully you learned something, and thanks for watching.